Hello, everybody. This is Dan and Chris again. Welcome to our next episode of A Father's Love Healing Through Heartache. And it is our pleasure today to have our guest, Patrick Lynch, on today. Chris, good morning to you, bud.
Morning, bud. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. And Patrick, welcome, sir.
Thank you. Great to be with you too today. Thank you.
We are thrilled to have Patrick on here today, and we're going to dive right in and let Patrick share his story. So, Patrick, the floor is all yours.
All right. Good morning to both of you, and I appreciate the opportunity. I'm in. I'm into my fourth year now with my loss, and I'll just start by saying that my tragedy began with my wife being diagnosed with a rare form of ovarian cancer, leiomyosarcoma. She had been going through her first round of chemotherapy, and then actually the morning that she was supposed to start her second round of chemotherapy, she was driving herself to get her cancer or her infusion, chemo infusion, and she called me from her car saying, asking me if I'd talked to my son Michael, and I said no, and she said, well, there's something going on at the other end of our block, and I tried calling him and he won't answer his phone. Could you try calling him? So I actually, I tried reaching him from my cell phone, and it rang and eventually went to voicemail. So what ended up happening is I got in. I'd been working from home that day. I got into my car and drove down to our corner. There's a firehouse with a parking lot, and I parked in the parking lot. I walked across the street, and I saw my son's backpack and a sneaker in the road. And his backpack had, like, the contents of the backpack had blown all over the street. The street was already taped off with yellow tape, and there was a fireman, a policeman, and some people that had been driving off to, we were sitting on the side of the road. Long story short, as soon as I saw the sneaker and the backpack, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And as you guys, I would assume, know with your losses, at that point it becomes like a movie that's in motion that you don't want to be a part of. Everything slows down, and your brain just tries to do its best to make sense of what doesn't make sense to you. So anyway, I did, like, I was just in stupor for about 5 seconds. I yelled to the police officer, where did they take him? And he said Strong Memorial. So what I did at that point was I got back into my car. I called my wife and I said, stay where you are. I'm going to meet you there. Michael's been hit. And so she had been picking up an iced tea at Dunkin' Donuts. I met her there. We got into the car. And again, as you know, the movie just is, you feel like you're A, in a bad dream. B, you feel like you're dead yourself. And you're just like a robot going through these motions. So somehow I knew I had to get to the hospital. Nowhere in my deepest thoughts did I think it was as bad as it really was. When I saw the sneaker in the backpack, I first thought to myself, maybe a broken leg. I sure hope he isn't paralyzed. Just like do things like that. Well, so my wife, we didn't really have a lot to say to each other in the car because we were both kind of in shock, but we got to the emergency room, went inside, and what should have been a clear sign to me was the first people that we were introduced to were not the physicians, it was the organ transplant people. Those were the first people we met, and we get sequestered into this small office, and they start talking us, not saying anything about Michael's condition, but talking to us about the organ donations and expressing that there's a time, there's a time limit on certain. It was very surreal, and I still hadn't. Maybe I think at that point my wife, who had wrapped herself around the severity of things. I hadn't yet. I thought maybe this is just customary, the way it rolls. I knew that the brain surgeon was still finishing up with my son. So anyway, we had that conversation, and we're like, okay, we'll take your information under advisement, and then it just the bad dream just continued to go on and on. We eventually met with some nurses who explained that he was in rough shape. That they told us about the broken leg, which was one of the side effects of it. He had a broken leg. They were still evaluating everything else. So, and I can't even tell you how many, minutes feel like hours, hours feel like minutes. We were downstairs in the hospital and eventually got brought up to the pediatric intensive care unit. We still weren't able to see him yet, and the nurses were telling us that it was his brain had suffered some damage, and they had to do a craniotomy on him for the swelling. And then there was a whole new level of the next thing you have to wrap your brain around that. All right, this is now our reality, and I think I came to the realization that it wasn't just going to be a cast and we go home thing at that point. But in any case, as time went on, we got to go into the room when they brought him back from surgery, and he was already on a ventilator. At that particular point, the ventilator was minor. He was still doing his own. All these things I never thought I'd have to learn about, but he was doing more breathing than the ventilator was, which was I guess a good sign as far as then and that particular moment. But then the brain surgeon, the surgeon that did the craniotomy came in. That guy, I mean, I'm sure he's an excellent surgeon, but he had the bedside manner of a screw. He basically looked at me and shook his head and said, "There's no coming, he's not coming out of that." Those were his exact words to me. He's not coming out of that. I was in denial. I was still like, no, this is okay. We're gonna pray our way. He's gonna come home. We're gonna pray our way out of this, and then and there. So in any case, that was like the initial sequence of events. A little bit later on, the next thing I recall happening was the chief of police in our town asked us to meet with him in a break room, a hospital visitor lounge, and he asked us for permission to look at Michael's cell phone they wanted to make sure Michael wasn't texting and walking across the street, things that when he was walking across the street and any of that stuff. So we gave him permission for that, and they did a test on that and realized that he had his phone had been in his pocket anyway, which they should have known. So he wasn't on his cell phone. What I need to tell you is important is the first release at this point that came across the national. This became a really big thing in our town. It was a big news event because of his age, and it's a school district where no kid has ever really been killed while crossing the street. All right, so the sound bites of the news started coming out, and the only two pieces of information that were being released were that my son was not in a crosswalk, and B, that the driver was not charged, no tickets issued at this time, which became pretty much the two pieces of information that were updated, communicated to the public on an ongoing basis. I'll come back to it. So we're wrapping our heads around this. Friends started coming to the hospital, and we were, they ended up filling up this visitors lounge. There was probably 100 people that were in there, and Bernadette and I would periodically go down there to just, to thank them for being there while we're going through the deepest of the, you guys know that feeling that you really don't want to be around the outside world. You want to just be with your family, but in any case, this is what the story became a big deal, and we're private people. So that piece of it was really hard. So here's the other piece of it that's really important for me to tell you. It was true. Michael was not in a crosswalk, but that became the talking point for, some people say, well, then it's his own fault that he's hurt/dead. And then I later found out by talking to one of our family friends who had driven down our street and passed my son while he was standing at the corner where the crosswalk was. He had seen Michael standing there. And to know the mechanics of our street, we're the first street you would approach after passing the school, after passing the high school. So it's a highly traveled road with people coming in both directions, turning on and away from the road that the school is on. So what had happened was Michael didn't have a chance to use the crosswalk. He waited at it, and the people were just coming and going and coming and going in both directions. He waited. It must have been at least 2 minutes. He waited, and nobody let him cross. So he went further down the road, and then, as you know, attempted to cross from there. So it bothered me initially when I came out of my numbness that part of his story was not being told. It's just interesting the things that say. And I had heard that there was a lot of things going on social media, like kids are saying that he tried to commit suicide and all this other, I realized at that point I stopped checking on Facebook and watching news, because it was just angering me more and more. But we'll get back to the police officer. Again, he told me that we gave permission, and they came back and said that he hadn't been on his phone. As a matter of fact, his phone was in his pants pocket. The police officer at that point asked me if Michael was having trouble at home, if he, trying to get around lines of like, was he suicidal? Which would have fit in beautifully if Michael had just run out of our house, down the street, and right across the street. But that's not the way it happened. That's not the way it happened. And I found out, the information I found out is all I did is I FOIL requested the police reports, spoke to all the witnesses that gave testimony, and got their views and their vantage points from a woman and her daughter were like in the front row of the street that he was crossing, that front row car, that they saw the whole thing happen. So, and I don't want to get into the minutia with that, but let's just say this: it bothered me from an early on standpoint that all that was being communicated was that he wasn't in a crosswalk and the driver wasn't ticketed. And I get it. I get there's rules of what's said and what can't be said, but that stayed with me and bothered me. Anyway, we'll get back to the hospital at this point. So, days moved. We went through the first 3 days of him being in intensive care, and at that point, he was still reacting to stimuli. Like if you touched his palm, his fingers would curl up, and they gave the hospital was amazing about giving us daily updates, and they had a team of 7 doctors that would make their rounds every day, and we would be there when they made their rounds, and they'd be in the room, and then they talked to us outside of the room afterwards. And the fact of the matter is, Michael had been hit with such significant force that he was thrown about 15 feet, and one of the witnesses that was coming down the road from another direction said that his body was 6 feet in the air above the car that hit him. All right. Now keep in mind, this is it's a small town environment where we live. At that particular time, the speed limit in front of the school was 35 miles per hour, and that was all day, every day. We live in a walking school district where there's no busing, so the area around the school is it's highly there's a high volume of pedestrian traffic, and again, these are things you don't think about. You guys know whatever your losses, however your losses occurred, you just, as a dad, you become laser focused on everything. The reason why, because our job is to protect our kids. And there's a piece of, I'll say me, there's a piece of me that I have to live with the fact that I never made my son swear up and down that he'd always use a crosswalk. Some people will tell you, well, that's irrational to have a thought like that. And I'm like, no, there's nothing's irrational when your kid dies, So I see it as a common thing, even like through the grieving dads websites, that the world will tell us no, but our job as being, providers and caretakers tells us, well, we have to find some place to put that, and I don't know. I guess I just wanted to put that out there that I had to wrap my hands around the fact that I never made him promise me he wouldn't use one. That became an additional source of grief for me, and I had to work my way through that. It also caused anger. In my particular case, I found out that our friends were worried about me committing suicide, because of my wife's condition and what had happened. In any case, over the next couple of days, we did have some meetings with the police officers that were coming to give updates on anything they found out. And the fact of the matter is, I feel like the investigation kind of stopped really quickly, and I felt like I was doing more detective work than they were, and it triggered something in me. My spirit of cooperation turned into isolation, and I like, oh, of course they don't. It's not their kid that died, so they're not going to spend as much time, work. They probably this is like a black mark on the town. They want this thing buried, and you know what I mean. I have to learn to live with that. So I feel like I'm talking too much, and I want you guys to tell me. Am I going too into detail with this? Or
No, I think you're doing a great job, Patrick. There's some couple things I want to throw out there with your story. I know you're not done with it yet, but some things that I think that are very similar with Dan and my story that you've said I've wrote down is that is like a movie. I never really understood that saying until the same thing happened with Mason. And Dan, you can jump in with Jameson. It does feel like a movie. Like, I cannot believe this is actually happening right now. So, Dan, was that pretty similar for you too?
Yeah, and like Chris, I'm just taking a lot of notes here, Patrick, because we want you to have the floor to say what you need to, and then we'll come in after. But yeah, you're just saying so many things that I want to comment on and ask you, but I want to do it later. I want you to talk. But I think one of the things you said that hit me right first was when you're grieving, your brain tries to make sense of what doesn't make sense to you. And spot on. But Patrick, this is your floor, man. You do what you want to do.
Okay, all right. So we'll pick up. I mean, we're still, we're back. We had actually been living at the hospital, Ronald McDonald House, on the site of the hospital. The people were wonderful. It was just like it was right on the hospital campus, and it enabled us to spend unlimited visiting time with him. And again, looking back, I truly believe that my wife had wrapped her head around realities quicker than I had, because I was still like, even into the third and the fourth day, I was still into the fact that this is going to be okay. He's going to leave with us. And I think other people were more cognizant of the extent of the injuries than I was. I saw him, again, as long as he was still breathing above the ventilator, I had every hope that he was going to come home with us, and we were going to be able to step back into what life was before it changed, before all this happened. But I guess as we get in, and to further tell you more about the time frame, this was all going on during this Catholics, like what we call Holy Week. So it was when everybody was getting ready to go on their Easter vacations, and we were in the hospital at, Holy Thursday, Good Friday. It was just really, there was a lot of symbolism with that, because it was also during the spring, and you're looking out the window and you're seeing the buds on the trees opening up and the sun coming out again. And the rest of the world is like, this when you first get your shot of the rest of the world's moving on. You're stuck here, but the rest of the they're getting ready for Easter Sunday, and they're on vacation, and we're at this point. We were at had to make the decision about planning his funeral, and our parish priest came in and had Easter Sunday Mass with us. And in any case, I think I got to get back in my time sequence here. So we're going through that week, and as we get into the second week of being at the hospital, the time became where his the respirator was doing more of the heavy lifting. The ventilator was doing more of the heavy lifting. He wasn't reacting any longer to stimuli, and then it was time to have the conversation about the ventilator. And my wife, I mean, she carried him, and she carried him, and I have to throw this in real quickly too, that we had lost our first baby. She conceived shortly after we were married, and our first son, Matthew Thomas, we lost him in the early part of the second trimester. My wife had what was called an incompetent cervix, which means her water just broke. Her water broke one night, and So in any case, so we've been through that already, and Michael, we had to work a year to conceive, conceive Michael again. It was, and you guys know, I mean, if you've had kids after the one you lost, it's not all happy anymore. After that, it's like we're on a mission to have a baby, and Michael was that baby. He was like the sign of hope and our joy after the loss, and so that's all the stuff that's going on in your head. So when it came time as far as making the decision about the ventilator, it wasn't an easy one. I didn't want to make it. I didn't want to make that decision because my wife said, "Look, you have to look at the reality. Chances are I'm not going to be with you in 6 months, and you have Brendan. You have Brendan to raise, and what this is going to look like is you're going to be visiting him. If he's still alive, he's going to be just on a breathing machine in some corner of a hospital, and I didn't know what to do with it. So like I called our priest. I called the chief of staff of the hospital, and we all got together in a conference room, and my parish priest consulted with like an another Catholic ethics master that he knew out on the West Coast, and I said, just give me the information. I gotta understand this. And I mean, I don't know what you say, ethically, whatever the word is, that the information we got was that, well, Michael had already died once. After, I didn't include this, when he had gotten hit, his heart had stopped, and he had not been breathing for a good 8 to 10 minutes before the ambulance even got there. So that, they brought him back. They brought his heart back in the ambulance. So that threw that whole other aspect into it. But the information we got was that you don't have to use life-sustaining machines. So, if he technically died when he died, it's what it is. The water will always be muddy as far as that. But if it was my wife was like, I mean, this was the baby that we tried a year. I'm saying that a year to conceive. If she was like, use the word okay, but it wasn't okay. If she was okay with it, I'm like. We reached agreement and said that we picked the time, which was actually turned out to be like Good Friday, and they came in, and there was just my son Brendan, me, and my wife in the room with Michael. And I will tell you guys this: if there was some beacon, some minuscule piece of comfort, it was when they turned the switch off. He wasn't choking, he wasn't coughing, he wasn't gasping for air. All that happened was he took about 2 breaths, and then just peacefully and quietly, that was it. That was the end of it. And when I tell you this now, it's like I can't even believe it. It's like part of that movie again. I can't even believe this was something we had to face. I can't even, I don't know if I could, you may agree with me. I think in your case is that thank God we didn't know ahead of time. We think about, we wish we did know because we could change it. This is the piece of it that says, thank God we didn't know. Thank God we could, you know what I mean? Thank God, thank God we didn't know that death was at our doorstep, because what would the days be like waiting for that to happen? They'd be awful, you know? So where do I go after this? So we planned this funeral. It was it was still like the world outside. It was just such a big thing in the news and everything. Like, we planned this mass, and I mean, there was over 1,000 people that came to the funeral. The calling hours, they wanted us to do 3 sessions because for some reason that seems to become more about the people that visit than the people that are living through it. At least in my case, we had to stand. We stood there for 3-hour sessions and let all these people that we didn't even know, 3/4 of them. God bless them. They waited in line to come up and say things, but I didn't want to be there doing that. I didn't, but it's part of what our rites of passage. So we did that. We had to go downstairs, the basement of the funeral home, and pick out his coffin, and my wife chose there was a model that was named Daniel, and she chose that one because one of his favorite songs was Elton John's song Daniel, and it kind of like it kind of like gave us it gave her some. I'm like, fine. And I ended up, after she passed, I ended up picking the same model for her because I knew it would mean it had some model, some symbolism to it for her. So I know I'm kind of like mixing two things here in the time sequence, but it was that way for me. That when after the ventilator was turned off and having to make the arrangements with the funeral home, it doesn't get any lower than that part. You're having to make decisions about what they're going to wear in the casket, and just that stuff was, again, more surreal things. And I would say this, and I'll get to, I'm gonna put a bow around it now for at least this part of the conversation. Is the next piece of it was coming home from the hospital after being there for 2 weeks. The movie, again, it's like the movie camera's still running in slow motion. You're driving down. In order to get to our house, we had to drive right past the spot where he was hit. The people in the town, in an effort to show their support, all the trees on our street had big green ribbons tied around them. Actually, a lot of the town, it was a symbol that they assigned to Michael's, to Michael's situation. So there was, there was all these green ribbons on all these trees, and we're driving down the street, and again, I'm seeing all the leaves starting to bloom on the trees, all this life stuff, and we're in this dark place, and the house is quiet. And now I'll get to the things that you guys know all too well, having to go up and see the bedroom. The house was never been so quiet. Never been so quiet. And you start thinking about all the things, like the last time we were here, he was alive. It remains surreal, and you don't want to see, I didn't want to see anybody. I know they wanted to see us, but I just wanted to sit in quiet for a while. So that was pretty much the whole Michael thing. The other hard piece after that was about a week later. I needed to go. I had to go clean out his locker at school, just because that's one of the things that's required. And that was the first time I was telling you this the other day, Chris. That was the first time I had what I think people call a panic attack. I'm emptying out his locker, and seeing his notes and things like that, and then my heart just started beating. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack, and all I wanted to be was any place other than there doing that at that particular time. And after that point, when I left and came home with his stuff, I couldn't go to the school property anymore. It was just too much for me. His friends that had been in shows and clubs and things like that had invited us to come to things. And I mean, my wife was able to do it for a while, but every time I drove by that school, I started feeling queasy, and I just that I just couldn't do it anymore. So as far as interactions with that, I probably could have handled things better than I did. Like what I did do was, once I got to the point where I'd be listening to news and little doses, not big doses, listen to a news report or go on to Facebook to see some of the things. You see a lot of nice things, but then you see some ridiculous things, like somebody calling my son a nerd. And then they started this thing where some kids would actually go out in front of the school and lay on the street as just some kind of representation about what happened to Michael. They would lay there and see how long they'd lay there, like play chicken before a car hit. And that's when I started getting really, really mad. And I started responding to some of that stuff and telling people they're idiots. And when somebody would say something that was untrue about the way it happened, I'd call them out on it publicly. I think the community expects, when things like this happen to us, they expect us to be, these kind, God-fearing people that only think about good things and stay away when they're unhappy. And they only, like my wife was that person. She started doing good deeds and buying the people behind her coffee at Dunkin' Donuts and the whatever you call it, leaving. She had these cards made where the bearer could have a free whatever something at Dunkin' Donuts, and she'd give them to the cashiers and say, buy the next 3 people whatever their order is. And she went to that place with it. I did. I stayed in my place where I was going to learn every aspect of the chain of events that led to him being hit, and somehow that was going to give me peace or help me quote unquote move on. That's a laugh, because that takes a long time. You can move forward, but you can't move on. I think at this point, I mean, I'm telling that's pretty much what happened, and I kind of closed myself off from our closest friends for a while because it hurt me too much to see their kids still alive. I became jealous of that. And I became jealous of the fact that they were all going to have their junior proms and go places. And then I wasn't going to be a part of that. I tried going to a couple of the, my son Michael he did impromptu comedy. And I tried going to a couple of those things, but it hurt more than it felt good. So I just found it easier to avoid it all for a while. So I wasn't the best person to be around for a good 2 solid years, guys. It was, I was bitter, grieving dad. I'll be the first one to own it. But it was the only way I could cope. So I think at this point, I'll turn it back over to you. And if you want me to go deeper to a certain piece of it or any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, there's just, wow. Patrick, first off, I'm extremely sorry for your loss. And, as Dan and I have lived through this too, we understand a lot of the pain that you're feeling, and we're glad you were able to come on and share it for everyone to hear.
Thank you.
I would love if you could maybe just tell us a couple things about your son that you really loved about him, some of the good things about him that the world loved about him.
Oh, God, it's so easy to do that, my friend. It's so easy to do that. He was a 40-year-old in a 14-year-old's body. He was so, both of my boys. He was an honor student. he was a good kid. We found out a lot of good things after he passed from his friends. Like he'd be, he'd be up at night in his room checking on all his. Most of his friends were from the stages. It was called stages. It was kids theater, like kids plays, and like I said, the impromptu comedy and all that. So he would be checking on his friends at like 1 a.m. Are you okay? And they shared texts with us after the fact that how he helped them through hard times. He was a kind soul. Like I said, he was never a discipline issue. He was never that. He was, if anything, he was cautious to a T, which was the irony of the word on the street, that he was careless, and that's what I think what hurt me the most about it was like the first story that he just came running down our block and ran across the street. What pierced me, and that's why I was determined to find out exactly how that played. But he was the child that his brother Brendan that you guys met was just 2 years younger, and Brendan was doing things like going down slides at the playground before Michael, like by about a year. Michael was. It took a lot of training just to get him to ride a two-wheel bicycle. He fell once and then didn't want to try it anymore, so I ended up getting a bicycle built for two, and we rode. But he was just an easy kid. When Bernadette got her cancer diagnosis, that's heavy stuff for young kids to have to shoulder. I know it was heavy stuff for me to have to shoulder, but to be, like I said, a freshman in high school, to have to he took it like a man, and he was like he was a kid that you could just say to him if there was a situation, he could take care of it himself, guys. He was a very mature and well regarded kid. We were so proud of him. He got selected for what they call it, academic. It's some national organization. He basically was the one kid selected out of his class in sixth grade. He went down to Princeton University for a week and got to pick a field to study and learn by college teachers and things. He just an easy kid. He was an easy kid. He was that an easy kid to raise.
He sounds amazing. I wish we could have had a chance to meet him. I'm sure he's bright in the world for sure. I'm gonna throw it over to Dan. Let him ask some questions. Dan.
So yeah, Patrick. I mean, thanks for sharing. It just
absolutely.
It's hard to listen to stories because everybody that's going through grief, we can pick out so many similarities.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to listen to. I guess what I want to focus on with my question for you is, this happened a little over 4 years ago, you said?
It happened in 2017. Michael was hit on the last day of March.
So 4 years into it, what differences can you clearly identify with how you're handling your grief now compared to those first few days and weeks and months and year?
I was hoping you'd ask that question. And I can only convey my experience. I think everybody's walk's a little bit different, but I think of the first year as being like somebody hits you in the head with a baseball bat, right? Everything's like a bad dream. You're just in survival mode. It takes everything you have, every ounce of energy just to get out of bed, let alone, go into the office and pretend you can do your job. Well, you'd rather be anywhere than there. So there's the whole first year. The first year was the hardest. The second year for me, a combination of you start to have a desire to interact with the world again, more than being a recluse that you had been. But more of a desire, but at the same time, the thoughts that you were too numb to think about during year one start to manifest in your head a little more. You still know you're never going to make sense of it. I would say you guys go, and you beautifully described. I mean, the first Christmas, the first birthday. There's nothing worse than that. It's the hardest thing in the world because you know, some people buy a cake and you just you get through it. Somehow you just get through the days. You get through the day. Into the second year, it was still, the holidays were still hard, but not as hard as the first year. The third year, routines become easier again. I would find, I don't know if you guys did this, but initially after it happened, I found I found a new supermarket because I didn't want to bump into people at the supermarket. I didn't want people to either look at me with pity or ask me questions that I didn't feel like answering yet. So I found a new supermarket because I was doing the food shopping at that point. I limited my time, still my interacting time. I did what we're doing right now in the latter part of the second year. I started reaching out to people. I aggressively sought people out on the internet that had sustained losses because I felt like I was going to be more compatible. People that would just, I wanted people that would quote unquote get the pain. And I did a lot of that. And it was mostly from a one-sided thing through some of these the grieving dad websites that are out there. But if nothing else, it was an attempt at socialization on some level again. So that happened the latter part of the second year. For me, the third year, the reality of the absence is in your mind. But I was in a place where, like I said, I wanted to celebrate with Brandon. I wanted him to have a happy Christmas memory. So I was looking forward to. I was able to get decorations down from the attic that my wife used to take care of all that stuff. We did that. Brandon and I went on a vacation. We went down to Florida just to get away and see some new place and do that. So that life was slowly returning again. And third year and fourth year, I'm almost wondering whether they were very similar. Year three and the fourth years we're into now. That I think this is probably how it's going to roll from now on. But I'll tell you this, at least in my case, that what I call the punch in the heart of the first year does subside. That does subside, and I still don't sleep. I don't sleep through an entire night. I also I lost my wife eventually too, and I mean we could do that conversation another time. And then the loneliness of just having one person in the bedroom, it accentuated what was going on in my mind and in my heart. That I hated going into the room because I knew I was going to be sleeping by myself, and I would do things like listen to talk radio just to have another voice in the room, but. I think you guys know, you don't, I haven't slept the same since before all this happened. I have not had a solid night of sleep since. So I think that's probably another one of the commonalities we go through. But for the first time in 4 years, I felt this sense of optimism. And I shared a little bit of this with you, Chris. It's on my heart now to create a place where we can discuss our grief, but we have to hit a point where we want to look out again, that we can also plan on something to be happy about, it's robotic. Initially it's a conscious effort. You have to choose I'm going to try and have a happy day today. I want something for us dads that we're together with each other and we're okay about being happy again. And whatever this piece of guilt that we carry, that we can do something with beautiful with that we can learn collectively to say, time to let go of that, time to say goodbye to that, because that's going to hold us down. We loved our kids. We loved we loved our kids. They knew we loved them. I believe in heaven. I believe they're there, and I believe that they don't want us to be miserable. So I shared a couple of ideas. I think that'd be a good conversation for another discussion. But the opus out of grief, the moving, the moving forward with them piece of it is what's on my mind and heart to somehow make it to a structure. Yeah.
Well, Patrick, I mean, I think you just hinted at something. I hope you'll come back again, because there's so much that I want to ask you still, that we could be here all day today. I hope you'll join us again.
I think you two guys is, like I said, you're best friends I haven't shaken hands with yet.
I've talked to Chris about that, and I think I said it last week. I wish I had never met Chris, and Patrick, I wish I had never met you.
And I understand.
Yep.
I understand. That's a kind comment.
Yep.
I get it.
But hopefully someday we can all find a way, especially because for our listeners, we're all Western New Yorkers here.
Yeah.
On today's episode. So
go Bills.
Yes, go Bills, go Sabres. I don't know if we can say that. But it's amazing how life circumstances bring people together. And I think, Patrick, you've said so many things that are going to stick out for me today, but one of the last things you just said is we've got to just try to do something beautiful with our guilt and our grief and our loss. And that was perfect, my friend.
Thank you. My suggestion is we meet up at a campground and write what hurts us on a piece of paper, and we collectively wash down a beer and throw that piece of paper into the campfire and cry, laugh, hug, whatever we got to do. I'm in when you are.
That's not a half bad idea. We might have to plan that for the future, Dan, for sure. So, Patrick, man, you're just another brother with us now, buddy. I'll tell you what, when you were telling your story, I was crying because I was remembering a lot of the same things that, you and I have the similarity with the ventilator. The ventilator is really, it's a touchy subject for me, and I remember the exact same moments we had to do the same thing. So I couldn't hold it in. I had some tears coming down, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. And I definitely would love to have you back on again to hear about your amazing wife and, what a strong woman it sounds like she was, going through so many things when your son passed. So,
excellent. I'd love to share that with you guys. I'd love to share, because it feels like the whole story doesn't get told. So we'll do that, when it works. And I appreciate your podcast. I've listened to two of the other sessions on it, and I what you got going here is a ministry. It's a ministry for the brokenhearted, and I love this more than anything else I've been a part of until today. So, kudos to both of you for starting this thing, and you got a piece of my heart. We each have a piece of my heart today.
Likewise. And another thing you said, Patrick, you do what you think will help. And this is one of the things that Chris and I know that it helps us. And we've said it repeatedly that at worst, we're helping each other. And we know, Chris or Patrick, either one, whoever wants to take it, do you want to share how you two got connected the first time?
I think Chris, you posted something on grieving fathers, right? That struck a nerve with me. I think it was a piece of your story that it struck a nerve in a good way. And I mean, one of my things now is like all this loss. I don't have a filter anymore. If somebody says something beautiful, I don't think about how they're going to react to me reaching out and saying, I love what you said. I'm not afraid of that shit anymore because life's too short. You know, I said, is that how it happened? I think that's how it happened.
Yeah, that is. So every week, Dan and I want to make sure we're trying to help as many people as we can. So when we post our podcast, I go on to as many grieving groups that I can, and I post it, and hope people will listen to our point of view of what we're going through, and hope that it helps them. And you liked what I said, and you reached out, and then as we kept talking, we found out we went to the same high school. As crazy as that is, couple of years off, but
yeah, a couple of decades off, buddy.
But nonetheless, we went to the same high school, and we struck up a common bond, and we've been talking ever since. And Patrick trying to help you out, you're helping me out, Dan's helping me out, all the grieving fathers. That is our goal on this podcast with Dan and I, is we want to help other grieving people understand they're not alone. Because a lot of times when this happens, like in that first year you were talking about, Patrick, you want to be alone. But people understand what you're going through, and we understand it. So many of the things that you said, I wrote them down here. It's our job as a father to protect our kids. The blame game, blaming yourself like you didn't do something right. The jealousy of other parents having all their kids. Dan and I have talked about all of those. I know I have all of those same feelings just like you, and I'm sure Dan has as well. And there's a lot more similarities in our stories than, and that's the same thing for other grieving families as well. So, Dan, what do you think?
I agree. And yeah, I have a whole list of things to talk about in the future, but I guess, one of the main messages today for everybody grieving is that, look at the similarities. And when I listen to Patrick tell his story, I hear Chris's story of when Mason passed. I also hear my story of when Jameson passed. You're kind of a mesh of both of us together into your story. But for everybody who's grieving, you're not in this alone. Whatever's going on in your head, it's a normal part of the process that, everybody we talk to has had the same thoughts and the same guilt and the same hurts and every part of it, that we're all in this together. And for people who aren't grieving, I think Patrick just, if you listen to his story, there's a whole lot of new things that Chris and I haven't talked about yet about community and how community can help or not help. And Patrick, I'm sorry that you went through what you're still going through, but especially when it was fresher within your community. It makes me super thankful for I'm in a very small town in western North Carolina mountains, and hearing your story makes me super thankful for my community, because they've been nothing but wonderful to me, and I can't imagine the horror, I don't know the right word, just the additional weight on your shoulder when you're trying to grieve the loss of your son, going through some of the crap you just described that your community is putting you through.
It made me stronger. It was the beginning of the filter going away from me, because I'm like, you can say whatever the hell you want about me, but when you start going after my dead son, you're gonna, in a way, it became cathartic for me, dude, because I couldn't leave those things unchallenged. I couldn't leave those things unchallenged. And two other things I want to say real quick to you is that I mean, there were a ton of people that were amazing, just like the experiences you guys had. But there were some idiots. There were some idiots. The other thing about today is that one of the things I've shared with Chris is that it's been tears weren't coming and crying for me, but talking today, you guys saw me too, wiping my eyes, and there's a part of that I feel it now. It's like their tears are cathartic. They're like putting salve on the scar of grief. They like, I feel good now that I got to a point where I cried, and I fought and fought it and fought it for so long. I mean, I didn't like cry, baby cry. I'm hoping I can get to that point where I baby cry. But just wiping the tears out of my eyes and wiping my nose and everything, it's like, there's a piece, I get it now, that there's a piece of that feels good afterwards. It's a release, man. It's a release.
Yeah, Patrick, I wasn't going to bring it up. I was going to bring it up separately when we were off recording, but I'm glad you brought it up. This was something you and I had talked about, that,
Yep.
The tears, they hurt when they're coming out, and Dan can probably attest. They hurt when they come out, for sure. But when it's over, you feel a little better, and it's like they're not weighing you down as much anymore. Nothing's ever going to bring back
Yep.
Your son, your wife. Nothing's ever going to bring our boys back. We know that. We're not oblivious to it. But man, getting those tears out, I'm so glad. I saw the tears on your face, and I was happy for you, buddy. I'm glad you got it out, and I hope more tears come. They're going to hurt, but you're going to feel better.
It's kind of the feeling that what it used to feel like when you'd get a full night's sleep. That restful peace. So, so you guys are like, I've already told you this. I love you to pieces, and you're like brothers that I haven't shaken hands with yet. And I'm so glad to have this as a resource, because I can't talk to anybody else the way we're talking right now.
Those words are perfect. Yeah. I think that's huge for our friends to hear again, that we can't talk to anybody like we can talk to each other about this. And we want to, but we just can't.
Amen. Amen.
Patrick, we're always here for you, brother. You need anything, you just hit me or Dan up. We're always going to be there for you. You need to talk, you need to cry. We won't even say a word. We'll be just there right next to you for when you need to get it out. I know I just finished my first year. Dan's past his second year now. And, you give me some things to think about for the future, for sure. And, but I'm glad we had this conversation.
Right back at you both. I appreciate this more than I can put into words right now. I'm gonna let it all just kind of muster around in my head, and like just revel in the aftermath a little bit. I appreciate the time today, guys.
So yeah, Patrick, Chris and I thank you. It's, again, we're trying to help each other on this. You just helped both of us. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing, being open and real. This is the first of many discussions to come, my friend.
Can I jump in real quick? Patrick, I was wondering if you could tell real quick before you leave, you're about to help out another organization, right? And I think you give, let people know about that so they can understand what you're going to try and help out with. And so others know that are going through grief. There's ways that you can help with whatever you want too. It's not the end of the road. We can help others along the way. Why don't you go ahead and let us know about that, Patrick?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned during the earlier conversation, that one of the things I did is you try and reach out to people that have lost kids, because you know that at least they get how much it hurts. And then you could even go more directly if we go deeper into our files. And I narrowed the search down to people who have lost their kids to being hit by cars, and to that specific area. And there was a woman also local in Rochester that connected with me that her son was hit by a car and killed, and we discussed the commonalities of how it's a news item for a bit, then they try to bury it. If the death doesn't occur from like a DWI or a road rage thing, somehow they think the pain is less. That the person's like, oh, at least it wasn't a drunk driver that killed Mike. So there's a whole different set of circumstances with a traffic one. And this lady is part of a group that's setting up rallies throughout New York State coming up in a week to a victim's bill of rights for pedestrian deaths and things of that nature. And she asked me if I'd speak at the rally. I said, well, first send me, I want to see what your Bill of Rights is and what you're asking for. And I agree with 3 of their 4 pillars that things they're trying to push through. So I've already told her I agree with 3 of the 4. The 4th one I'm not really a fan of, that would limit the type of vehicles that people are allowed to drive on the roads. I'm not that, I don't buy into that piece of it, but I told it. So anyway, there's going to be I think it's June 2nd, if I'm not mistaken, in Rochester. There's going to be a big rally downtown at a park that's downtown, and I'm going to attend it. And then she asked me if I'd be willing to speak at it. I said, if need me to, I will. We'll see how that goes. And I've got to start working on that piece of it. That'll be my next task list item. So yeah, I'll update you on how that goes. And I think it's going to be probably public, and it's going to be in the news. But they'll be doing it in Rochester. They'll be doing it in Albany. They'll be doing it in New York City. For some reason, they're not doing it in Buffalo. I don't know. That's lack of interest or whatever. But next time we talk, I'll give you an update on how that all played out. And thank you for asking about that, Chris.
Yeah, definitely. And for any of our listeners that are listening, Patrick, do you know the name off the top of your head of that organization that you're going to go
to? Let me pull it up. Let's see here.
And I hope it goes really well, and I hope you're very successful with getting your story out and maybe help others understand the severity of, paying attention on the road and, making sure you're always paying attention as responsible drivers should be.
Yeah. So, and it's called New York Rallies for Safe Streets, and it'll be going on in the state June 1st through 4th. And as I said, the Rochester one is going to be June 2nd during the noon hour at the what we call Parcel 5 downtown. It was the site of an old building that had been raised that they've made into a park. So yeah, they support like safe streets, enforcing speed limits, reducing distracted driving. Those are 2 of the main, the main points on it. And I don't think I mentioned this in my earlier conversation. One of the things that came out of Michael's death was that the town supervisor did a concerted effort to have the speed limit lowered in front of the school. It had been, like I had said earlier, it had been 35 miles per hour. I showed him some research that showed where a pedestrian gets hit and the driver going 35 miles per hour, they have like a 1 in 10 chance of surviving being hit. That doesn't really make sense in front of a school in a district where kids have to all the kids have to walk. So what's gone on since then is it's been lowered during walk to school hours. It's been lowered to 20 miles per hour, and then otherwise non-walking hours it's been lowered to 30. So good came of that. There were no crossing guards at the school. Now there's 2 at both sides of the school, and they've improved the signage. They've improved the crosswalks are at least painted every year. They were not been maintained. And there's slightly, I'm not completely thrilled that there's still, in my mind, not a significant amount of police presence. I still see people speeding, and I don't see anybody ever being pulled over. But in any case, there were measures that were taken. So good, the good did come out of it. But then again, I'm the dad that's saying, well, why did my kid have to be the reason? I don't. That's the part that's still a tough pill to swallow. Why didn't somebody that's in charge of public safety research what I did and show that, the difference in deaths between 20 miles an hour and 30 miles an hour is like 8 kids. You have eight times more of a chance of not surviving being hit. I'm not the one I'm not saying we got to lower our speed limits on highways to 40 miles an hour. I'm not grandpa that drives 20 in the fast lane. I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy, but there's no excuse. There's no excuse in front of a school. There's no reason that people need to be going 35 because if 35 posted, it means they're going 40 and above. We know that. We're all, we're all on the road. We understand how things go. So anyway, you got me on my soapbox, Chris.
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to say thank you for pushing those things. It sucks. Dan and I say all the time. It sucks that you're going through this, and it sucks that you're the dad that had to push for those changes at the school. And you'll never know, but I, in my heart, believe that you probably saved some other kids by doing that. So I'm glad you were able to push those changes and help prevent other parents have to go through what we're going through. Dan?
Yep. You do what you think will help. Patrick's own words. And I give you a ton of credit, my friend. The strength it takes to move forward and try to change things. It sucks that it's us doing it. But all the credit in the world to you for doing it. And yeah, you've probably saved lives because of it.
I never honestly thought in terms of that, but what I want to add to that is now that I have, being here today, having two more kindred people that, what a helpful thing this last hour was. What a helpful thing that I'm just really pleased the way the chain of events occurred. I guess I'll leave it at that with both of you. But it's my head hasn't felt this clear in a long time. I think I got an opportunity to do some spring cleaning on some of the garbage that was sitting up in there. so thanks for giving me kickstarting my spring cleaning on my head.
Well, we're happy to help for sure, and we're definitely hoping you'll be back again, and we'll definitely have you back on again. We'd love to hear the story of your wife when you're ready.
Appreciate it, guys. You say the word and I'll be there.
Dan, I'll throw it over to you.
Yep, awesome. So thank you as always to everybody who's listening. It's amazing every time we talk how we just get into a whole new pathway of things that we haven't thought about discussing yet. Patrick, thank you for joining us and sharing, and definitely we look forward to having you back next season. To our listeners, as always, we love your feedback. Patrick is an example. He reached out to Chris based on a post, and he impacted me. I know he impacted Chris. I imagine he's impacting somebody listening, and that's why we're doing this. We're trying to do what we think will help. So give us your feedback, as always, through Facebook, Miles for Mason, Jameson's Joy, direct messaging Chris or me, or now Patrick. If you're one of Patrick's friends, reach out to him. We would love to hear what questions you have that we can try to answer in future episodes. Go back and listen to all the old episodes, because we're starting to get that feedback that some lives are being impacted, and that helps us. It motivates us. So thank you for sharing, whatever way you want to reach out to us. And until next time, this is Dan and Chris and Patrick on A Father's Love, Healing Through Heartache.